Hi, my name is Mandeep and I am a software developer from Delhi, India. I like to explore new technologies by building something using those. And I love to share my knowledge with the fellow developer community. And for the same purpose, I am creating this YouTube channel to share my learnings with you. And this is my first YouTube video. And in this video, we will learn how to install Elasticsearch 7 along with Kibana using Docker. The reason I'm using Docker is that you can use this installation setup to install Elasticsearch and Kibana on any instance, whether it is Linux or Windows or Mac, and even if it is a different distribution of Linux. So, for example, if you need to install it on AWS, Ubuntu, or CentOS, or any other Linux distribution, this setup should work just fine. However, if you face any issues while trying to run this setup on maybe Windows or Mac, you can post your questions in the comments section of this video and I will try to help you out. I am testing this setup on Ubuntu Linux, and for that it should be working definitely fine. And without any further ado, let's get started. This video assumes that you already have Docker and Docker Compose installed on your system, and for that I will recommend, if you don't have installed, I would recommend you to check out the official documentation for that. And I won't be going through the installation steps because it will be different for different machines, whether it's Linux or Mac or Windows. So I will share the link in the description and you can follow the instructions for your platform. First you need to install Docker. Once you have installed Docker, then you need to install Docker Compose. I will share the link for this also in the description. And after you have Docker and Docker Compose installed, and make sure that Docker engine is running, how do you make sure that Docker is running is by, you need to run the command docker info, and it should print some output like this with the server section, and the client section. If you are not getting this, then it means that Docker is not running, so we'll need to troubleshoot to make sure that Docker is running. And once you install Docker Compose, you can check out its version number. If it prints the version number, then it means that you have Docker Compose installed on your machine. Okay, so once you have Docker and Docker Compose installed, all we need to do is create a Docker Compose file. What a Docker Compose file does is it gives you a blueprint of how to create the Docker containers on your machine, and it connects these two containers using a network. So I will explain how it happens. I will explain the Docker Compose file that we are using for this setup. So for our setup, you can create a folder on your machine. On my machine, I have created this folder YouTube Docker video, and if I go to the terminal and use pwd, it's in my home directory under coding fundas and YouTube Docker video. So this is the folder in which I have my docker compose.yml file, and we are using version 3, so it is a convention that we have to use. Older versions have different syntax, different file structure, but the latest version is version 3, so we are using that. I would recommend the same. And in this compose file, we define different services. Each services will have a Docker container for itself. So for our setup, we are defining two services, Elasticsearch and Kibana. You can name them anything else. So for example, this could be named as backend, this could be named as front end. It's up to you. Whatever you want to name them, you can name them. But to keep things simple, I am naming them as Elasticsearch and Kibana. And under each service, we specify the configuration for that service. So how to spin up this container. For Elasticsearch, we need to use the image for Elasticsearch. How did I get to this? If you open Google and search for running Elasticsearch using Docker, you will find this guide, and if you go through the documentation, it will tell you that all the list of published Docker images and tags are available on docker.elastic.co. And if you go to this URL, you will find Elasticsearch and Kibana as well. So if I go to Elasticsearch, I will find the list of images, that the official Docker images that Elastic is publishing, and we are using the latest one, but the first one is on ARM architecture, and most likely you will be running an AMD architecture machine. So if your processor is Intel or AMD, then you need to download the AMD machine, not the ARM. Okay, or AMD image, not the ARM. So for our case, since my machine is Intel machine, I will be using the AMD image, and this is the entire command to pull this image, and we just need the image tag and path. So if I copy this and I pasted it here, and this is the image that we need to pull from docker.elastic.co to create our Elasticsearch container. And I will come back to this section. For Kibana, we are using the docker.elastic.co Kibana/Kibana, the same version that we are using for Elasticsearch. And this one also I found by visiting this URL and going to the Kibana list. For this, we don't have any separate ARM machine or ARM images, so we are just using the AMD ones. I copied this and pasted it in my compose file. And yeah, for the env file setting that we are using here, it allows us to pass on the environment variables to our Docker container that we will be creating using this setup. So what it helps is that oftentimes when you install Elasticsearch, you need to make some changes in the configuration using the elasticsearch.yml file. But the good thing about these Docker images is that it allows you to pass on certain settings through the environment variables, which can be applied directly to the elasticsearch.yml file. So you don't have to separately create a new elasticsearch.yml file and mount it using the volume mounts. You can use the environment variables to pass on your settings. And the environment variables that we need to pass, either you can use the env flag of you need to check out the documentation of Docker Compose for that, but there's a setting which allows you to pass on individual environment variables over here. And there is another setting called env_file, which allows you to pass on all the environment variables by defining them inside of a env file. So we are using this because it's more secure. In case you want to, for example, you want to push this repository to GitHub, and let's say your environment file includes something sensitive information, so you can put this environment file in the git ignore and push your compose file changes directly to your repository, and there is no risk of sharing any sensitive information, the credentials in your repository. Okay, so that's why we are using this approach of providing the env file. However, in our case, we don't have any sensitive information because we are not using any security in this setup. Okay, so in the elasticsearch.env file, what we need to define is the cluster name. You can call it anything. The network host should be 0000, and this is also a setting that you need to provide. And for the latest version of Elasticsearch, if you don't provide discovery type single node, it will give you some error. So for the latest version 7, you need to provide this setting as well in the env file. And these are the settings for Elasticsearch. For Kibana, you need to provide the server host as 0. Elasticsearch URL will be http elasticsearch 9200. The reason I'm providing Elasticsearch 9200 is because our Elasticsearch service is named as Elasticsearch. So for example, if I had named it as Elasticsearch 1, then in the kibana.env file I would have named this as Elasticsearch 1. So whatever is the name of your service, you can reach out to that from other containers using that service name. So this is the benefit of using Docker Compose, because it creates a separate network for all the services, all the containers running through this Docker Compose, and each of these services can access each other using their service name. So even if I don't expose these ports to my host machine, Elasticsearch container can access Kibana by using the URL http kibana 5601, although it won't need to do that, but it is something that is possible with the help of Docker Compose. Okay, so in Kibana we have provided the Elasticsearch URL as this, and we have disabled the XPath security. We won't be talking about this in detail in this video, but I do have a blog post on how to enable the XPath security using Elasticsearch version 6.8 if you pass it as true. But for this video we will be using as false. I will be sharing the link to the blog post in which I have described the process of enabling the XPath security. Okay, so once you have these settings and you have the env file, volume map is something that I'm using so that the data in our Elasticsearch node persists on our host machine. What this will do is it will create, actually we need to create this directory so that it is accessible by Elasticsearch. Sorry. And under this directory we need to create another directory which is Elasticsearch. Yeah, so that's it. We don't have to insert anything into this directory. Now when we create these containers, the data from user share Elasticsearch data inside our Elasticsearch container will be mapped to our host machine's directory data under data/Elasticsearch. So when we stop these containers, the data will persist and won't be lost, and when we restart these containers later on, we will have all our indices that we had created earlier. Okay, so now our setup is ready. All we need to do, okay, so one more thing that I forgot to mention, Kibana runs on port 5601, and that's the reason we are mapping the port 5601 from our container to our host machine, so that when you visit localhost colon 5601 on your web browser, you should be able to access Kibana. Okay, so our setup is ready. All we need to do is run docker compose up -d. I'm using the D flag so that it runs in the background and doesn't keep my terminal window busy. And since I already have downloaded these images, so it started up pretty quickly. But if you don't have downloaded these images, it will pull these images from docker.elastic.co, and it will take a few minutes depending on your internet speed, and after that it will start these containers. So in order to check whether our containers started up fine or not, you need to run docker compose ps, and I can see that the state is up for both my containers. If it is not up, then you will need to examine using docker compose logs -f and the service name. So for example, Kibana, if Kibana is not in up state, if it is in exit state, you can inspect the logs of that service using this command, and it will show the logs. It takes a few minutes to start up and connect to our Elasticsearch container, and once it does, you should see the message in the logs. So let's wait till it does that. By the way, these are some messages that you can ignore. Yeah, so our server is running on HTTP port 5601, and also I was inspecting the logs and I did control C. This doesn't mean that it killed the Kibana container, because I was just using the tail command to see the logs. If I do docker compose ps, I can still see that both of them are up and running. And Elasticsearch doesn't have any ports exposed, ports mapped to the host machine, but Kibana has port 5601 mapped to host machine, so we should be able to access this one. Great. And once you are in Kibana console, they have added a lot of features in this new version. Earlier it didn't used to be so loaded with all these features. So what we are interested in is the dev tools. This is where we can run Elasticsearch queries and see what indices we have using the aliases command. So these are some queries that I ran earlier. So let's put some data in our index. This will create an index called library and push these entries into it. Yep. And now you can do a search to return all the rows, 3 rows, and you can run some query. Sorry. Let's run a match query. Field name makes. Yep. So we can run queries over here. And one cool thing is the new SQL API, where you can use this post API endpoint and pass on the query as an SQL. So for example, select star from library and it should display the results that you would normally see in an SQL database. You can provide where conditions as well, where page count is equals greater than 500. Yeah, so these two entries have page count more than 500, and you can see. So that's pretty much it. This completes our lesson, and I hope you found this useful. Thank you.